from the song that opened his voice. Summer melted gently into early autumn, and with it, the Langston estate continued its quiet transformation, not through renovations or grand gestures, but through warmth, ritual, and the return of life. Leo now spoke daily, not always with ease, but with growing confidence. He asked questions, he laughed at jokes, and sometimes late at night, he would sing fragments of lullabies to himself. Curled beneath his blanket, the window cracked open to let in the wind. He was not the same boy, and yet in many ways he was finally himself. Elena remained a steady presence in the home, though still a maid by title. Her role had expanded far beyond duty. She was part of the fabric now, a fixture in the rhythm of their days. Each morning began with her voice in the kitchen and ended with her laughter trailing down the hallway. It was a sound that had become essential. One afternoon, Leo ran into the study, breathless with excitement. "Can we show her the garden room?" he asked his father, eyes wide. Vincent looked up from his desk. "The one with the piano?" Leo nodded. "She hasn't seen it yet, and I want to sing." The garden room had been closed since his wife's death. It was her favorite space, a glass-wall corner filled with climbing ivy, soft chairs, and a baby grand piano that hadn't been played in 3 years. Vincent hesitated only a moment. He stood, reached for the key in his drawer, and placed it in his son's hand. "You open it." Leo beamed. That evening, under soft string lights and the fading blush of sunset, Elena stepped into the garden room for the first time. The air smelled of roses and old memories, but it didn't feel sad. It felt expectant. Leo sat at the piano bench, feet barely reaching the floor. He looked up at Elena. "Will you sing with me?" She smiled. "Only if you start." He pressed the first key, uncertain, slow, then another, and then he began to hum, his voice steady, clear, a melody she knew by heart. Elena joined him, her voice blending with his like a familiar thread in new fabric. The song wrapped around the room like a gentle breeze. And outside the glass, Vincent watched, hand resting on the doorframe, his eyes glistening. When they finished, there was no applause, only silence, the kind that follows something sacred. Elena walked over, kneeling beside Leo. "That," she whispered, "was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." Leo looked at her seriously. "It felt like my mom heard it, too." "She did," Vincent said softly, stepping into the room. No one corrected him. No one had to. That night, for the first time, the three of them shared a meal not out of obligation, but out of choice. There were no formalities, just soup, bread, laughter, and stories. Stories of Italy. Stories of childhood. Stories of things once lost and now, slowly, found again. By the time the candles burned low, Leo had fallen asleep on the couch, a blanket pulled up to his chin, Elena's sweater tucked beneath his head like a pillow. Vincent turned to her. "You didn't just help him. You helped me remember how to be someone's father." She shook her head gently. "You never stopped. You just forgot how to hear him." They sat in silence for a while. Not the kind that hurts, the kind that heals. Outside, the wind rustled the ivy and stirred the trees. Inside, 3 lives, once fractured, found their harmony. Not perfect, but real and lasting, from the song that opened his voice. By Monday morning, the mansion no longer felt like a museum. The echoes in halls no longer spoke only of absence, but of something stirring, something alive. Leo had not suddenly become talkative, but his silence had changed. It no longer felt like a wall. It felt like space between words, waiting to be filled. Elena arrived earlier than usual that day. She found the breakfast table already set, not by the housekeeper, but by Vincent himself. There was a fresh pot of tea, and next to it, a note written in clean, deliberate handwriting. "He asked me if you'd sing at breakfast." She smiled to herself. In the sunlit dining room, Leo sat upright in his chair, his small hands folded neatly on the table, eyes focused, waiting. Elena entered, nodded gently, and began to hum as she prepared the fruit. A different song this time, light, almost playful. And Leo, as if he'd always belonged in the melody, hummed along. Across the table, Vincent watched the exchange with quiet wonder. His son, once lost in silence, was now reaching toward the world. And this woman, hired to mop floors and change linens, had become the bridge between past pain and present healing. As days passed, the house itself seemed to transform. Rooms that had stayed shut for years were opened. Dusty curtains were drawn back to let the light in. Leo explored spaces he once avoided. The music room, the back garden, even the greenhouse his mother once tended. Wherever Elena went, he followed, learning not just to speak, but to trust again. Sometimes he would talk in fragments, a word here, a thought there. Other times, he would whisper lyrics while Elena sang aloud. And on one particular morning, as she folded freshly laundered bedsheets, he looked up at her and said clearly, "You sound like my mom did when she was happy." She paused, a lump in her throat. "I think she's still with you, Leo," she replied softly, kneeling so they were eye to eye. "In your heart, in your voice." He nodded, tears welling, not out of sadness, but because he finally understood something that hadn't made sense before. Vincent, too, was changing. He began arriving home before sunset, spending long, quiet hours reading with his son or sitting beside him as he practiced humming songs. The court files still came, but they were no longer his escape. His priorities had shifted, and the weight he carried now had room to be shared. One evening, Elena prepared a simple Italian dinner, and without being asked, Leo helped set the table. He placed 3 plates instead of 2. When Vincent saw, he raised an eyebrow. Leo looked up. "She eats with us now." Vincent glanced at Elena. She hesitated. "If that's all right." He paused, then nodded slowly. "Of course." They sat down together, and for the first time in years, the dining room rang with something it had sorely missed. The sound of conversation, not polished or perfect, but real. After dinner, Elena stepped into the hallway to gather her things. As she reached for her coat, Vincent followed. "I owe you more than I can put into words," he said, his voice low, honest. "You've done something no one else could." She looked up at him, her eyes kind but unwavering. "I didn't heal him, Mr. Langston. He healed himself. I just gave him something to hold on to." He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. In that pause, something deeper passed between them. Not romance, not yet, but something human, something shared, as if their separate griefs had recognized each other and agreed to rest. Upstairs, Leo drifted asleep humming the lullaby that had opened his voice. The house, once cold and hollow, now breathed softly with the sound of healing from the song that opened his voice. It was a Sunday afternoon, warm and golden, the kind of day when even silence felt softer. The garden was quiet except for the rustle of wind through the ivy and the low buzz of summer bees. Elena stood near the rose bushes, apron dusted with soil, gently humming as she clipped away dry petals. Her voice floated lightly in the air, delicate, unforced. It wasn't performance. It was a memory-made sound. Leo sat at a distance on the stone bench beneath the old elm tree. Legs curled beneath him, arms wrapped tightly around a worn book he never opened. His eyes were fixed on her. She began to sing. Sado a el cielo che respira lento. Dormi, cor mio, dormi contento. It was the same lullaby. But this time, there was something new in her voice, a subtle ache, a quiet offering. She didn't know that this was the exact spot where Leo's mother had once rocked him, beneath that same tree, whispering the same tune. As Elena's song reached its final line, the air shifted. A sound stirred. So soft at first, it could have been imagined, a breath of murmur, but it was real. Contento, the word fell from Leo's lips like a secret the wind had kept for years. His voice, small, raw, and unsure, trembled into the open. Elena froze. The garden, the trees, the very air itself paused. She turned, eyes wide. Leo stood slowly, his hands clenched at his sides, his mouth parted in confusion. Fear, even, as if he didn't know how it had happened, as if the voice that had left him had returned without asking permission. Tears welled in Elena's eyes. She crouched slowly, never reaching out, only meeting his gaze. "You remembered," she said softly. "You remembered her." He blinked, then nodded. Behind them, Unseen, Vincent Langston stood at the glass door, stunned. He had come looking for a file and found his son speaking. The strongest man in the courthouse now felt utterly fragile. Vincent stepped outside, slowly, as if afraid that sound or movement might break the spell. Leo saw him. Their eyes met for a long moment across the garden. Neither moved. Then Leo did something Vincent hadn't seen in years. He reached out his hand, and Vincent, breath caught in his chest, walked forward and took it. No words, just the warmth of a tiny palm in his, and a voice echoing in his mind. His son's voice. That night, Elena sat by the kitchen window, staring out at the garden bathed in moonlight. She didn't need thanks. She didn't need credit. All she needed was the sound of that one word, still ringing like music through the halls. Upstairs, Leo whispered softly as his father tucked him in. Will she sing again tomorrow? Vincent looked down at him. Only if you ask her. Leo smiled, a real one, and then, in a voice still learning itself, he replied, Then I will. The Langston estate sat high on a hill, regal and untouched, its silence as heavy as the stone walls that surrounded it. The mansion had all the elegance money could buy, grand staircases, chandelier halls, and a garden sculpted with precision, but inside it was haunted by a quiet far more unsettling than ghosts. Leo Langston, 7 years old, had not spoken in over 2 years. His father, Vincent Langston, was a man of immense wealth and immense distance, a sharp mind in the courtroom and a stoic presence in the press. Vincent had risen to prominence as a high-profile corporate judge, but in his own home, he was a stranger. Since the sudden death of his wife, he had buried himself in work and silence, mirroring the grief of the boy he no longer knew how to reach. Leo didn't scream. He didn't cry. He didn't even fidget. He simply observed, his wide, brown eyes filled with questions no one could answer, and a voice no one could hear. Therapists came and went, suggesting everything from selective mutism to trauma-induced aphasia. Vincent, methodical and impatient, tried every method money allowed. Nothing worked, and so the boy remained a quiet presence in the vastness of marble floors and echoing corridors. Then came Elena. She arrived without ceremony, just another new maid hired through an agency, except older, gentler, and with eyes that looked as if they knew stories no one had told in years. She spoke with a soft Italian accent and moved through the house as though it were a sleeping creature she didn't want to wake. Elena didn't ask questions. She didn't flinch when Leo appeared in the doorway or stood silently in a corner watching her mop the floors. Unlike others, she didn't try to engage him with bright toys or force games. She simply acknowledged him with a nod and continued her work, humming softly as she went. It was that humming that first stirred something. Leo began to follow her, not obviously, not out in the open, but like a shadow. He trailed behind her through corridors and lingered near the kitchen door while she folded linens. Always just within earshot, she would hum melodies, slow, sweeping tunes from old Italian folk songs. Songs of longing, of memory, of warmth. Vincent noticed a change, faint though it was. The boy seemed calmer, more attentive. One morning, he found Leo sitting near the garden, chin resting on his knees, listening to Elena sweep the patio as she quietly sang under her breath. It was the first time in months Leo had chosen to be near someone on his own. Miss Elena, Vincent said one evening as she was polishing silverware, do you always sing while you work? She looked up, her eyes steady. Only when I feel the house needs it. He said nothing more, but the phrase stayed with him. The house needed it. Elena never pushed. She never asked Leo to talk, never asked what he was thinking, but her presence, gentle and constant, filled the spaces grief had hollowed out. She sang to the roses while watering them, to the walls while dusting them, and sometimes, though she didn't know it, to the quiet boy who clung to every note like a lifeline. One night, Elena stood by the open window of the library, humming a lullaby, an old Italian tune her mother used to sing. Leo stood down the hall, hidden by the doorframe. He didn't blink. The song stirred something forgotten, a sound he'd once known before the silence, a sound he remembered from his mother. Inside the study, Vincent closed the file folder, glancing toward the melody floating through the air. He didn't know the song, but it made his throat tighten. That night, For the first time in years, Leo dreamed in sound.